Well, are you in the mood for mode? That's what I want to know, because on this English language A-level video, we're going to be looking at the contextual factor of mode. Now, when I say mode, I mean the physical channel of communication. And conventionally, when we're looking at mode, you'd think about two oppositional differences. You'd think about written text on the one hand, and you'd think about spoken texts on the other. So when we're looking at written text, it could be anything, couldn't it? From an A-level English language textbook, comme ça, or a shopping list, or a letter from the bank, or a street sign, or even a tattoo. And a bit later in the video, I will be showing you my new tattoo. Or it could be, on the other hand, a spoken text, like a chat about the weekend with a friend on the bus, or a teacher like me giving a set of instructions to a class, or a patient talking to a doctor, or a radio presenter presenting a song. So these are your two conventional different modes of communication. And obviously the mode is having a big impact on the language usage. But look at this middle column, if you will, because here we're talking about blended mode texts, which are a little bit of writing and a little bit of speech, a hybrid, put them together. Think, for example, when you're WhatsApping your friend, so you're physically typing it on the screen, so it is a written text, but of course you are including all sorts of conversational, spontaneous chat-like features, and that's what makes it a blended mode text. Similarly, a speech maker writing a speech for our beloved leader Boris Johnson is clearly going to be writing it down in quite a formalized way, but they're probably going to be using all sorts of phonological features, rhetorical devices that gives it the sense of informality and chat in places. An email from your aunt, a scene from EastEnders, or even lyrics sung by Ed Sheeran would be further examples of blended mode texts. Now, this stuff is important because if you're doing the AQA, English Language Paper 1 Section A, where you're analysing meanings and representations, you're promised two texts, and quite apart from a difference in timescale between them, you're promised two different modes. So that means that one of your pieces could be, for example, a newspaper article, and the other one could be a transcript of speech. So two different modes. So the modes are clearly important on the language. Now, what do you think are the main differences linguistically between texts which are spoken data and texts which are written data and texts which are blended mode data? Have a think about that. Let me throw at you some words which you could be using to describe the language from these different modes. So have a look at them and go through the words, and do you think the words are more likely to apply to spoken data, written data, or maybe blended mixed mode data? Okay, I'm assuming that you've had a look at those. Now you will see the way that I've color coded these. You've got black ones and red ones, and the red ones are characteristic of what you'd say is conventional written data. So conventional written data, like for example our beloved textbook, is clearly very planned. Committees of people have sat down to make sure that it's fully organized. It's clearly structured neatly into chapters and sections. It's a permanent piece of writing. It was produced in 2015, and here I am, 6 years later, still using the goddamn thing. So it's a permanent piece of text. It's context independent in the sense that, I can pick up the book and it doesn't matter where I'm picking it up or where I'm picking it up, I'm still going to be getting the same meanings from the book. So it's context independent. And also, because I've got time on my hands to look at the book and construct the meanings from it, it means that the writer can produce sentences which are grammatically complex. So there'll be quite a high level of formality in places because it is an A-level textbook and you lot are very brainy, so it has to be quite formalised. And in terms of the audience, it's not written for somebody who's sitting there in the same room as the text producer. So the audience could be sitting anywhere. They could be in Darlington. They could be on the other side of the world. So the audience is elsewhere. Now, the other thing about the text is that it's transactional, i.e. it's there to communicate information or instructions or to persuade. i.e. there is a business behind it, okay? And that makes it different from speech, which is often interactional and interactive. Interactional meaning it's there for social purposes. Most of the book you would expect to be written in standard English because it is planned and structured and grammatically complex. And it's easy to see how the sentences and the paragraphs have been broken down. Okay, and because it's a written text, graphological features are actually important. So the spellings, the punctuation, and the use of images and headings and font sizes and font styles, they're all important components in gleaning meaning from the text. All of those are modal characteristics of written data. Now you compare that to speech. Speech tends to be informal and spontaneous. It tends to be loosely structured and unplanned, and it tends to be ephemeral, i.e. we say something and there it goes. It's lost in the ether, and a minute later you've forgotten completely what anybody has said. So it's not permanent, it's ephemeral. Spoken texts do tend to be deictical as well. And deictical means that they are context dependent. So if we have the line, she put it there yesterday, then obviously it depends very much on the context of the situation, of who she is, what is there, what is it, and when exactly was yesterday. All of those utterances are deictical. Speech does tend to be grammatically simple. I mean, these are tendencies, but it does tend to be grammatically simple. And the audience tends to be co-present. As we said before, speech will have a tendency to be interactional, perhaps as well as transactional, meaning it's as much about maintaining and establishing social relationships as it is about actually communicating pieces of information. And speech is often interactive, i.e. your turn depends upon my turn, and my next turn depends on what you've just said. So in that sense, it's a bit like a dance. So speech tends to be interactive, non-standard, it's time-bound, it's space-bound, and if you listen to speech, the sentence boundaries are not necessarily clear-cut, are they? Okay, which makes it so difficult to transcribe people's speech because it's not entirely clear where a sentence is ending and a new sentence is beginning. Now, paralinguistic features, that's body language. So paralinguistic features are really important components of speech, i.e. what you're doing with your hands, where are you looking, how close are you to the other person. So paralinguistic features are important. And finally, of course, prosodic features. Now, prosodic features means variations in your tone, pitch, volume. So the musical features of your speech are clearly playing an important part in the meanings. Okay, so in a nutshell, we have over here spoken mode characteristics, and over here we have written mode characteristics. And what I really want to draw attention to is that when you're looking at blended mode texts, you're looking at a hybrid between those two, which makes them so interesting to analyse. You might get them in the exam, in your meanings and representations. It may well be on your language investigation that you decide to look at some blended mode texts. Okay, so let's now move on to a specific example, which is given to you in the textbook. So I've just taken this from the Cambridge AQA textbook, which shows really the difference between two different modes. And this one is a good example because you've got the same theme, the same topic, the same situation being used. But on the left-hand side, we have a transcript of two parents who are coming out of a kids' show. So they meet each other in the reception and they have a chat about what they've just seen. And then on the right-hand side, you've got a review. So this is a internet review of the show that the parents have just looked at. Alice says, "Hello, didn't see you in there. You okay?" Jill says, "Yeah, that was so great. You had such a good time, didn't you, Michael? Did you like that, Luke?" Luke nods. "Which one did you go to?" "The Ninky Nonk." "You?" "Yeah, too. It's so good here. The way they've done the tent and all, really good, really impressive." And you know the price is good for us all? Definitely. Amazing. Now this has all of those key components of speech. Okay, so if you look at the very beginning there, and incidentally you've got these brackets with the dots in, so that means a pause. So if it's got a dot in it, it means the pause is less than a second. And if it's got a number in it, then it's the number of seconds pause that's in there. So as you can see, it's quite broken up. Okay, and these people are not talking in sort of standard sentences, and therefore that's characteristic of spoken mode. We have fairly equal kind of turn taking going on, so that's a discourse feature of speech where Alice says something and then Jill answers in return. So we've got here quite an even what's called MLU. The MLU means the mean length utterance, and you can work out the mean length utterance by counting up the number of words that a participant says and then dividing it by the number of turns that they have in a piece of speech. And what that gives you is a kind of average number of words per turn, and that's quite useful if you're looking kind of at the power dynamics that's going on in a conversation between two people, a dyadic conversation. So that's called the MLU, it's the mean length utterance. So if you were to sit down and to count up the number of words that Alice is saying and then divide it by her turns and do the same with Jill, you'd probably find that it's about similar. Okay, so it's equal in terms of power dynamics as well. Now, are you noticing here that lots of sentences are interrogatives? So we've got lots of questions being asked. So you've got, for example, did you like that, Luke? So interrogatives keep the text interactive. But it's also not only interactive, it's interactional as well, meaning that the whole of the piece is not just about people communicating information, but it's actually about kind of building, establishing and maintaining social relationships. So a lot of it is kind of phatic, that's Phatic, phatic or interactional. Have you noticed how much of this is non-standard? So when Jill says, for example, the ninky nonk, you? So we don't have any verbs there, those are non-standard sentences, so they're completely elliptical. And that's a very efficient use of language because it would be very tiresome if every time we met we had to construct standard sentences where we weren't missing out any of the words. So it's efficient, but it's non-standard. It's also highly deictical as well, in that we are not in this situation. So the things that they're referring to, sometimes they're using lots of pronouns, the yous there, the theys there. So the pronouns are being used there, and they're deictical. So it depends on the context. You would have to be there in that situation in order to understand this properly. And of course, we're not hearing the prosodic features that are going on, nor are we seeing anything to do with the body language as well. So when we're looking at a piece of transcript like this, it's a very poor representation, actually, of this discourse event. And notice also how you've got non-verbal communication here. You've got words like oh and and you've got some heavy lifting being done by things like adjectives and adverbs. So definitely, for example, and really would classify as sort of intensifying adverbs. So it's a very dynamic and interesting piece of language. Now, if you compare that with written mode, let's have a look at that. In the Night Garden Live, it's sometimes helpful to call on a toddler for reviewing advice, especially when faced with the task of identifying the likes of Iggle Piggle, Pinky Pork, Macca Packa and the rest from In the Night Garden Live. Taking place in a purpose-built dome, the school is an enchanting experience for preschoolers, in which the characters of the CBBC's programme are given the live theatre treatment, and so it goes on. Now we can see here, this is absolutely characteristic of the more formalised, planned structure of written mode. Look, for example, at your first sentence, which starts here and ends there, which is tidily put together with punctuation, with a capital letter at the beginning and capital letters on the beginnings of proper nouns and a full stop in the end, and a single inverted commas around the actual title. So the punctuation helps us make sense of this formalised piece of text. And we start off in the first sentence with a lengthy sentence, which is a complex sentence, because we've got a main verb that's in the first line and a half, and then we've got a subordinate clause that begins with especially when faced with. So the rest of that is a subordinate clause. So clearly this is written by somebody who has more time on their hands. They're not just writing it spontaneously, and it's been carefully constructed. And that's why also it includes some quite precise information as well. I mean, in the transcript, we had the mention of Ninky Nonk, but over here, we've got quite a range of names that are being given. Okay, and you can see that this extended detail that you've got, like for example, the adjective purpose-built dome, these are carefully selected pieces of vocabulary which are not just spontaneous, but quite a high level of complexity. So it's more challenging. The other thing to notice is that there's a quite high level of certainty which comes across in this piece. So the show is an enchanting experience. So the is bit there is what linguists would call the copular verb. It creates a sense of certainty. The show is an enchanting experience. So you've got quite a high level of certainty coming through here, and you've got quite a rich range of vocabulary. Enchanting, for example, is a word as a pre-modifying adjective, which is perfectly suitable for this written piece of text, but might strike Jill or Alice as being a bit odd if one of the other was using it in the transcript. So that's a really nice representation of the differences in mode between speech, spontaneous speech on the one hand, and written text on the other. If you were writing about it, these are the sorts of things that you might be saying. So the text A transcript contains a large number of interactive features, with the speakers setting up adjacency exchanges which require responses. You okay? Did you like that, Luke? And the turn-taking regular and featuring a short MLU. The interaction between the speakers has strongly interactional flavour, being as much about maintaining social relationships. Notice the enthusiastic agreement of Jill to Alice's assertions. Definitely amazing, as about conveying transactional information. Text B, on the other hand, does not address the reader directly, so there are no second-person pronouns, that's you, interrogative forms, so there's no questions, and there are no imperatives, like instructions. And it's concerned with conveying information in a clear, straightforward way to an implied audience, assumed to be knowledgeable about children's TV, because you've got the characters of the CBB programs are given the live treatment. Notice the things in blue here are your examples of what's called AO1, Assessment Objective 1, where you're using your key linguistic terms. Okay, so we're drawing to the end of this little video, which has shown the differences modally between writing and speech, but has also suggested that actually some of the most interesting texts that you're going to come across on this course are actually hybrids. They're kind of like mixtures of the two. Thank you very much.